weekend.
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Fridays are my day.
I need a drink. Where's the booze?
Let the party begin. It's showtime.
The Mighty 790 KFGO, good afternoon, and welcome back to The Drive. I'm Dan Michaels. Bob Harris is our producer today. How you doing today, Bob?
Doing real well.
Good
It's
to
a
hear.
Friday, and I'm feeling fine.
Woohoo! Finally made it to Friday. And you just heard Paul Juergens of the KFGO News Center. We'll go back to Paul with more news at the bottom of the hour. We are really pleased to have this gentleman with us. Alan Lichtman is a distinguished professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C., and has authored or co-authored 11 books. His most recent one, The Case for Impeachment, The Embattled Vote in America. His FDR book, called FDR and the Jews, won a National Jewish Book Award in American Jewish History. It was a 2013 New York Times Editor's Choice work. He was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in History. He is a star historian who has predicted presidential elections correctly since 1984, including President Trump's 2016 election victory against forecasts of virtually all other polls. He's created a system known as the Keys to the White House. He says he has 13 economic and political trends for his forecasts, and the candidate who has most of these factors in his favor or her favor is likely to be the winner. Without any further ado, let us introduce you to Dr. Alan Lichtman, Distinguished Professor of History at American University in Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, Dr. Lichtman.
Hello.
It's great to have you on with us today. So we better jump into this because there's people on both sides of the aisle right now are going, huh? What's going to – I mean, this election has got to be one of the most fiery elections in the history of the United States, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when you hear each side saying this is the most consequential election in American history, of course there's a little bit of hyperbole there, but you rarely hear it so fiercely from everyone concerned.
As a professor of history, Dr. Lichtman, it's the elections that we've had, the politics that we've had in our country going back to the 19th century, those campaigns were really raw and really mean, and there were a lot of fighting and stuff like that. But because they were so far back, people don't remember their history, and nobody had a television camera back then. It's hard to equate how nasty things were back in our early history of our country. But this particular election and the political times we're living in now, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it seems to me that we are reliving some of those times.
Oh, absolutely. You know, if you go all the way back to the election of 1800, you know, the election of Thomas Jefferson, his opponent said blood would run in the streets if Jefferson was elected. The churches would all shut down. America would become an atheist nation. The Jeffersonians attacked their opponent, President John Adams, saying, you know, he planned to marry into the British royal family and return the United States to Britain. So things were pretty rough back then, but we have not seen anything like this in our own lifetimes.
Yeah, this has just been an incredible politically charged. I would have to say the last 4 or 5 years, it's just been just intense, and now there's threats of perhaps another civil war one day, and I want to ask your opinion about that as we go along. However, just sticking with the story, the reason, number one, to have you with us today, Dr. Lichtman, and we sure appreciate it so much, is that you have predicted that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States, and this is not Dr. Lichtman's not on one political side or the other. This is based on your 13 keys. Can you please walk us through the factors that let you come up with this conclusion?
Sure. And of course, you know, my predictions are totally nonpartisan. Going into this year, I predicted 4 Republicans and 5 Democrats in 9 elections. Mathematically, that's as even-handed as you can get. And as you can imagine, predicting Trump in 2016 did not make me very popular in 90% Democratic Washington, D.C.
I bet
so
not.
Here's the situation. We've had just an extraordinary shift in presidential prospects. At the end of 2019, Trump was looking pretty good. On my 13-key system, it takes 6 negative keys to count out the party holding the White House, Trump and the Republicans. He was down 4. He had a 2-2 cushion. And then, of course, America was hit with the twin crises of the pandemic and the cries for social and racial justice. Right here in my study, I have a note which says, "Professor, congrats, good call, signed in big Sharpie letters by Donald J. Trump." He recognized my call, but he didn't understand the deeper meaning of the keys, which is that it is governing, not campaigning, that counts. The keys measure the big picture of incumbent performance and strength. And as we've now learned, that I made this prediction a month ago, but reinforced by the tapes of my good friend Bob Woodward, rather than dealing substantively with these crises, Trump reverted to his 2016 playbook when he was the challenger and thought he could talk his way out of it. Didn't work. He lost 3 more keys. The short-term economy key, when the economy fell into recession, the long-term economy key because of the sharp negative growth, and, of course, the social unrest key because of what's still raging across the land. So he went from 4 keys down and a likely win to 7 keys down, 1 more than is necessary to predict his defeat. So my final prediction is that Donald Trump will become the first sitting president since George H.W. Bush in 1992 to lose a re-election bid. And by the way, never before, we talked about American history, but never before in the history of the U.S. did the party holding the White House suffer such a dramatic and sudden reversal of fortune in just a few months. Never happened.
Dr. Alan Lichtman, who is a professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C., and has accomplished so many things, but, in a fast food world that we live in now, he's probably best known just off the top as a guy who has predicted every presidential election since 1984. He's created a system known as the Keys to the White House, which he was just walking you through there. And according to those 13 keys, he is saying that President Trump will lose the election. Would the president have lost this election in your mind, in your 13 keys, no matter who he was facing in the election?
That's correct. I only have 1 key that has something to do with the challenger. And that key, the keys are always phrased in a way that an answer of true favors the party in the White House. And my 13th key is the challenging candidate is not charismatic. And I rate that as true. Joe Biden is not a Barack Obama in 2008 or a Franklin Roosevelt. So absolutely, this prediction has nothing to do with the identity of the Democratic candidate. Basically, it says any generic Democrat would win. This is a change election.
Because of those 13 keys that you've got. So along the lines of another, and, being a professor of history at Washington's American University and have such a deep background in American history, there are people right now, we were featuring something like this a couple of days ago. There was a gentleman, and I'm sure he's speaking for a certain segment of the audience, that is threatened violence. The president himself has even said there's going to be violence in the streets if I'm not reelected. Do you think there's a possibility with all the unrest going on right now? Is there any validity that people think there could be another civil war in the United States?
I actually don't. We've seen threats of violence before, for example, in the contested election of 1876, when you had to decide it by a commission appointed by the Congress. Let me express the irony of this. On the one hand, we have Donald Trump saying, I have to lie to the American people about what I know about the pandemic, even though no matter what the consequences are, because I don't want to cause panic. And then, as you point out, his campaign is based upon causing panic, upon causing fear. If Joe Biden's elected, crime will rule our cities. Our cities will burn down. Will turn into Venezuela. The suburbs will be wiped out. I've never seen a president instill panic like that and yet say, I can't deal with the pandemic because I don't want to cause panic. It's just incredible. But I don't think there's going to be a civil war. What I do think is Trump will go to his grave, no matter what the results saying. He really won. The election was rigged. I should have had a second term. But I don't think he's going to barricade himself in the White House and get the Boogaloo Boys or the Proud Boys to defend him. But you may see some unrest.
Yep, I think so too, but hopefully that won't go that far. I'm glad to hear you say that as well. Dr. Alan Lichtman is a professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C., and is joining us today. We're running out of time, Dr. Lichtman, but I wanted to ask you, it got nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but what's really caught me, and I think you know where I'm going, is you are a 16-time winner on a game show called Tic-Tac-Dough. I remember that game show. Bob is lit up over there. Our producer is going, I remember that too. You won that game show 16 times?
I defeated 20 opponents. I was on 16 shows, won 4 cars, and over $100,000 in cash and prizes. Big money in 1981. But I got to tell you, it took a lot to get on that show. You had to take a test. You had to interview with the show coordinator. You had to interview with the director. You had to take a practice game. I had to go to beautiful downtown Burbank 4 times just to get on the show. But then it was a great thing. And I actually had fan clubs for a while. For a while, I was like Tom Cruise. It all disappeared, of course, But for about a month, it was kind of cool.
I just had to ask, was that still Wink Martindale?
Wink Martindale. Wink and I became great buddies. Wow. He's still alive. We're pushing 90. We're kind of at the opposite ends of the political spectrum. And, great guy, not the brightest bulb. He'd come up and say to me, I don't know how you answer those questions. I can barely read them.
Dr. Alan Lichtman is a professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C. He's predicted the presidency correct since 1984. He says it's not going to be President Trump this time around. He says his competitor, Senator Biden, will win, and he's a 16-time winner on the game show Tic-Tac-Dough. 4 cars and $100,000. I'm going to calculate the value of $100,000 from 81 to today's dollars when we're in the break, Doctor, and I got a feeling it's going to be a real impressive number. Dr. Lichtman, I'm so sorry we're out of time. I hope we can have you back on again one day, sir. You are just fascinating.
You know where to find me. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. KFGO time, 4:25 at the Mighty 790. You're listening to The Drive on KFGO.
The most trusted source for the information you need. KFGO.com.